Quick question. Have you ever noticed that some people get strangely competitive around you? You tell them you started going for walks. Suddenly they're hiking mountains. You mention reading one book. Now they've apparently read an entire library. You say you're a little tired. They haven't slept since 2019. Everything somehow turns into a competition. And you're just trying to exist. Now here's the interesting part. Most people think intimidation looks obvious. They imagine the loud person, the powerful person, the person who walks around acting like they're the CEO of oxygen. But real intimidation is usually much quieter than that. Sometimes it's the person who's comfortable being themselves. Sometimes it's the person who doesn't chase approval. Sometimes it's the person who says exactly what they mean. And sometimes it's the person who doesn't even realize they're affecting people at all. That's why this topic is so fascinating, because the people who intimidate others the most are often completely unaware of it. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're not trying to be mysterious. They're not practicing dramatic facial expressions in the mirror. They're simply living their lives. Meanwhile, somebody else is overthinking everything, and if you've ever felt confused by people's reactions, if you've ever wondered why certain people seem nervous around you, or why some people make strange assumptions about you before they even know you, you might finally get some answers today, because we're about to go through 8 signs your presence intimidates people without you realizing it. And I have a feeling at least one of these signs is going to make you stop and say, "Hold on, that explains a lot. So get comfortable. Maybe grab a coffee. Maybe grab a snack." Because some of these signs are surprisingly subtle, and once you notice them, you'll start seeing them everywhere. Let's start with the first one. Sign 1. People explain themselves to you when nobody asked. This one is funny, and once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. You'll ask somebody the simplest question imaginable, something harmless, something innocent, something that should take 5 seconds to answer, and suddenly they're giving a 15-minute explanation. You ask, "How was your weekend?" And now you're getting a full documentary, with bonus scenes, deleted footage, director's commentary, everything. You didn't ask for details. You didn't ask for evidence. You weren't conducting an investigation. But somehow they're defending themselves anyway. Why? Because people often reveal their insecurities without meaning to, and when someone feels a little intimidated, they can start explaining things that don't actually need explaining. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence makes them feel observed. Now here's the funny part. Half the time you're not even paying attention to the thing they're worried about. They're explaining why they bought a certain car, and you're standing there wondering what you're having for dinner. They're defending a decision. You're mentally trying to remember where you left your phone. 2 completely different conversations are happening. One out loud, one inside your head. And this is where things get interesting. According to Jung, people often project their own thoughts onto others. They assume you're judging them because they're judging themselves. They assume you're noticing their flaws because they're focused on their flaws. Meanwhile, you haven't thought about any of it. This is why intimidating people are often confused. They see reactions, but they don't understand where the reactions are coming from. And honestly, sometimes the reactions have very little to do with them. People are often responding to the stories happening inside their own minds. Which brings us to the second sign, and this one is even more noticeable, because it usually happens almost immediately. Sign 2. People decide how they feel about you very quickly. This one is fascinating, because sometimes people meet you and instantly like you. I'm talking immediately, 5 minutes into the conversation, and they're already acting like you've known each other for years. They're laughing, they're smiling, they're telling stories. You're thinking, that was fast. But then there's the other side, the people who seem uncomfortable before you've even finished introducing yourself. Nothing happened, no argument, no disagreement, no awkward moment. Yet somehow they look like they're preparing for a debate. And you're sitting there wondering, we just met. How did we get here already? The truth is, strong presence creates strong reactions. People who are comfortable with themselves tend to bring out hidden feelings in others. And those feelings aren't always positive. Some people feel inspired, some people feel challenged, some people feel curious, and some people feel uncomfortable. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because something about you highlights something they're still working through. Think about it this way. Have you ever met someone who was incredibly disciplined, not annoying about it, not showing off, just naturally disciplined? Suddenly you become aware of all the things you've been putting off. The gym membership, the unfinished project, that one drawer in your house that's been a disaster since the invention of electricity. They didn't say anything, yet somehow you're thinking about your entire life. That's the effect presence can have. It shines a light on things. And not everyone enjoys being under that light, which leads us to sign number 3. And honestly, this one happens so often it's almost funny. Sign 3. People tell you their life story way too fast. You know that moment when you meet someone, and 10 minutes later they're telling you things they probably shouldn't be telling you. Yeah, that. You ask a simple question, maybe, how's your week been? And suddenly you're hearing about childhood memories, relationship problems, family drama, a cousin who borrowed money in 2017, and somehow a pet hamster gets mentioned. The conversation goes places nobody expected, including them. Now you might think, how is that intimidation? Good question, because intimidating presence isn't always about making people nervous. Sometimes it's about making people feel safe. The strongest people in a room aren't always the loudest. They're often the people who seem grounded, the people who don't look shocked by every little thing, the people who can listen without immediately turning everything into a speech about themselves. And when people sense that stability, they open up, fast, almost suspiciously fast. It's like your calmness accidentally became a confession booth. 1 minute you're discussing the weather. The next minute you're learning information that should probably come with a confidentiality agreement. And afterward, they sometimes look surprised. Like, wow, I don't usually tell people that. Exactly, that's the point. Presence can create trust, and trust can make people reveal far more than they plan to. Now let's move to the next sign, because this one creates some truly awkward moments. Sign 4. Your silence makes people nervous. Silence is one of the most underrated things in the world, and also one of the most feared. It's amazing. A room can be completely comfortable. Then 3 seconds of silence happens, and somebody immediately panics. They'll say anything, absolutely anything. Nice weather. Weather's weird. Did you see that bird? What even is soup? Suddenly words are flying everywhere, because many people are uncomfortable with silence. Now if you're someone who can sit quietly without feeling awkward, people notice, more than you think. Because being comfortable with silence shows confidence, not loud confidence, not attention-seeking confidence, just the quiet kind, the kind that says, I don't need to fill every second with noise. And that's rare, very rare. Most people feel pressure to perform, to entertain, to say something impressive, to keep conversations moving. But when you're relaxed enough to simply listen, it changes the energy. Some people appreciate it. Others become nervous, because silence gives people space to think, and sometimes people don't enjoy what's happening in their own heads. Meanwhile, you're perfectly comfortable. Maybe you're reflecting. Maybe you're observing. Maybe you're just deciding whether pizza counts as a personality trait. Who knows? But the point is, your calmness becomes noticeable, and noticeable things tend to make an impression. Speaking of making an impression, the next sign is impossible to miss once you recognize it, and it usually happens when you least expect it. Sign 5. People keep looking at you. Let's talk about something that happens all the time. You're minding your own business, not performing, not trying to get attention, not doing anything special, and then you notice someone looking at you. You look over. They quickly look away. A few minutes later, there it is again. Now, before we go any further, no. This doesn't automatically mean attraction. Let's keep our feet on the ground. Sometimes it's attraction. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's admiration. Sometimes it's confusion. And sometimes they're just wondering where they recognize you from. Human beings naturally pay attention to people who stand out. And standing out doesn't always mean being flashy. In fact, some of the most noticeable people are the least flashy. They're simply comfortable, relaxed, present. And in a world where everyone seems rushed, distracted, or glued to a screen, that stands out. It's surprisingly rare. People notice energy before they notice words. That's why someone can walk away and forget what you said, but still remember how they felt around you. And if people seem to observe you more than expected, it may not be because you're demanding attention. It may be because your presence naturally attracts it. Now the next sign gets really interesting, because it reveals itself through competition, and once you see it, you'll start laughing every time it happens. Sign 6. People turn everything into competition around you. This one is honestly kind of funny. Once you stop taking it seriously, you meet someone, normal conversation, everything is chill. Then you mention something small, like you started waking up earlier, and suddenly they've been waking up at 4 a.m. since childhood. You say you've been reading more, and now they've apparently finished 600 books and are working on a personal library the size of a small country. You say you went for a walk. They've climbed mountains, not metaphorical ones, real ones, with snow and goats. Somehow everything becomes a competition, even things that were never meant to be compared, and you didn't even enter the game. That's the funny part. You're just talking. They're scoring points in a tournament you didn't sign up for. Now here's the deeper layer. This usually isn't about you. It's about how they see themselves in relation to you. When someone feels secure, they don't need to compete over every detail. They can just enjoy the conversation. But when someone feels a bit unsure of themselves, they may try to level the playing field. Not consciously. It just happens. And sometimes your presence becomes a quiet reminder of things they want to improve about themselves, so they respond by trying to match you in some way. Even if you weren't trying to be ahead in the first place. The interesting part? The most grounded people rarely compete. They just exist. And, ironically, that calm energy often makes others compete even more, because it stands out without trying. Now let's go to the next one. And this is where things start getting a little more emotional, because this sign shows how deeply people actually remember you, even after you're gone from the conversation. Sign 7. People remember you. Longer than expected. Have you ever had a random moment like this? Someone you barely know. Months later they bring up something you said, word for word, and you're sitting there thinking, wait, I said that? Meanwhile, you can't even remember what you had for breakfast yesterday. That contrast is interesting. Some people leave no trace. Others leave a mark without trying. It doesn't come from trying to be memorable. It comes from being real, because authenticity sticks. Most conversations are forgotten quickly because they're predictable, safe answers, polite responses, standard behavior. Nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't always leave an impression. Then there are people who speak differently, not louder, not smarter, just more honestly, more naturally, more like themselves. And those moments stay in people's minds longer than expected. Sometimes it's not even what you said, it's how you made them feel. There's a reason someone can forget your words, but still remember your energy. That part stays, and if people remember you longer than you remember them, that says something about your presence, not in a dramatic way, just in a human way. Now the final sign. This one ties everything together, and it explains why all of this even happens in the first place. Sign 8. Your calm energy exposes other people's chaos. This is the big one, the one people don't usually notice at first, because it's subtle, very subtle, but powerful. When someone is constantly anxious, reactive, or uncertain, they don't always realize it. It feels normal to them. That's their baseline. Then they meet someone calm, not fake calm, not, "I watched one motivational video and now I'm enlightened," calm, real calm, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't chase approval, doesn't need to prove anything, and suddenly something shifts. Not because you said anything, but because your presence highlights the contrast. It's like walking into a noisy room with someone who is completely still. You don't even need to speak. The difference is already obvious. Carl Jung talked about how we often become aware of ourselves through others. We see parts of ourselves reflected back. Sometimes that reflection is comfortable, sometimes it isn't. So when someone meets a calm, grounded presence, it can quietly bring up things they haven't dealt with yet. Restlessness, insecurity, overthinking, comparison. And they may not even understand why they feel that way. They just feel something. That's why some people become uneasy around calm individuals, not because the calm person is doing anything, but because calmness removes distractions, and without distractions, people feel what they usually avoid. Now here's something important. This is not a reason to become arrogant. It's not a reason to think you're better than anyone. It's just an observation about human behavior. The goal isn't to intimidate people. The goal is to be grounded. Because grounded people don't need to perform. They don't need to shrink. They don't need to prove anything. They just exist. And that alone changes the energy in a room. So let's bring it all together. Some people may react strongly to you. Some may compete. Some may open up too quickly. Some may feel nervous. Some may remember you longer than expected. And some may not even understand why they feel what they feel. But none of that means you should change who you are just to make everyone comfortable. Because here's the truth. You will never be perceived the same way by everyone, and that's normal. The real focus is not becoming someone who disappears into the background. It's becoming someone who is simply comfortable being themselves, without forcing it, without shrinking it, without exaggerating it. Just real. Now I want to ask you something. Which one of these signs have you experienced the most? Be honest. Drop it in the comments. I actually read them, and sometimes the patterns people share are more interesting than the video itself. And before you go, if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And hey, support me with a coffee if you enjoyed this video. It helps more than you think, and it keeps this channel alive and growing. Appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next one.